Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and we may proceed
Mr.
with the
Chairman, I
hearing.
ask for a record vote.
A recorded vote has been requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Goodlatte?
Aye.
Mr. Goodlatte votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith votes aye. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes aye. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. King? Mr. King votes aye. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Poe? Mr. Poe votes yes. Mr. Marino? Mr. Marino votes yes. Mr. Gowdy? Mr. Gowdy votes yes. Mr. Labrador? Mr. Collins? Mr. DeSantis? Yes. Mr. DeSantis votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Yes. Mr. Ratcliffe votes yes. Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. Rutherford? Mr. Rutherford votes aye. Ms. Handel? Ms. Handel votes yes. Mr. Rothfuss? Mr. Rothfuss votes aye. Mr. Nadler? Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Jackson Lee?
No.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen votes yes. Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
You may not understand Russian yet.
Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes no. Mr. Gutierrez? Mr. Gutierrez votes no. Ms. Bass? Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Mr. Schneider? No. Mr. Schneider votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote?
Mr. Chairman, how am I?
Gentlewoman is recorded as no.
Can't hear you, please. Thank you. Want to ask or are they waiting on that?
No.
We're going to wait another minute or two for the ranking member, so are you recorded? The gentleman is recorded.
Mr. Chairman, how am I recorded?
Yeah.
Not
The gentleman
recorded.
from Louisiana is not recorded.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson votes yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Swalwell votes no.
Chairman, may I make a parliamentary inquiry?
Gentlewoman will state her parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to inquire of the basis of the emergency and the cause that has generated this resolution to ignore the regular order of the 7-day notice of the notice.
It's not an emergency, it's good cause. The gentleman from Maryland.
Yes. How am I recorded?
Not recorded.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no.
Good guess.
Mr. Chairman, continue your generosity. Could you state for the record what the good cause is?
The fact that we've worked very hard with these two gentlemen, who I very much appreciate adjusting their schedules to be here. I know that they both had, the gentleman from New York.
No.
Mr. Nadler votes no.
The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, 17 members voted aye, 13 members voted no.
And the,
Mr. Gentleman, would you finish your sentence? You said these two gentlemen.
I'm gonna first declare that the vote is approved and the notice requirement is waived. Now, I'm going to recognize myself for an opening statement, and I'll begin that opening statement by saying to both Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Director Wray that I am very appreciative of the fact that they have changed their schedules to be here so that we could have this hearing today and in a reasonable amount of time after the Inspector General's report and testimony before the committee. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of John Lausch, the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, who was appointed by the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to facilitate the production of documents which were not being produced in a timely fashion. We still have complaints, but the situation, in my opinion, has improved considerably, but we'll have new issues that we will address here today as well. So I'll continue my opening statement. The Church Committee was established on a bipartisan basis and chaired by Democratic Senator Frank Church in 1975 to review CIA, FBI, and NSA surveillance abuses, including the improper surveillance of an American icon, Martin Luther King Jr., and other prominent individuals. The committee also conducted a review of the insidious monitoring of political activities of citizens exercising their First Amendment rights. The Church Committee's findings resulted in passage 3 years later of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. FISA attempts to balance the need for secrecy in conducting surveillance against foreign agents with the protection of Americans' time-honored civil liberties. This history shows we have already found ourselves once before in a situation where the FBI and other intelligence agencies violated their oaths to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. In monitoring citizens' political activity, the agencies exercise their responsibilities in a manner unworthy of U.S. officials. The abuses of that bygone era, and really of any era, often happen because of power. Power to influence political currents, power to collect sensitive information, and power to wield surveillance tools in improper ways to achieve improper purposes. That power can and has been abused in the past by individuals at the highest and lowest levels of our government. Fortunately, the power of our intelligence agencies is overwhelmingly used to protect us from those wishing to do our country harm. That is the conundrum. We need our intelligence agencies to have the necessary tools and techniques to safeguard our nation, and we have to be constantly vigilant to ensure these tools are not manipulated by unscrupulous actors. The recent Inspector General's report revealed bias in the top echelons of the FBI during a hotly contested presidential election. It revealed that FBI agents, lawyers, and analysts held profound biases against then-candidate Donald Trump and in favor of his opponent, Hillary Clinton, while those on the other side of the aisle continue to exclaim that these biases are only personal political predilections that had no effect on the operation of one of the biggest investigations in our nation's history. I wonder whether these same members would say the same if text messages had turned up to the tune of "Hillary is a disaster," or "We'll stop her," or cursing her with all manner of expletives, or smugly stating that particular parts of the country smell of Hillary supporters. These types of comments were originating from people who were the fact finders in the investigation. These profoundly inappropriate comments were coming from the individuals who were making decisions on whether to provide immunity to people who had already lied to investigators, and whether subjects of an investigation could sit in on interviews with other subjects of the same investigation. These were individuals who were plainly in positions of great power with the opportunity to place greater, lesser, or even no emphasis on certain facts or interpretations of law. These actions led to complete legal exoneration of everyone involved in sending top-secret emails over personal servers and unsecured emails and setting up a server for the explicit purpose of doing this. These actions even led to exposing at least one classified email to a foreign party that risked serious damage to our national security. Amazingly, Considering their overwhelming biases, these people were also the very same people who were assigned to investigate the man that they hated, then-candidate Donald Trump. My reference to the Church Committee is apropos because it not only reviewed abuses by individuals, including the FBI director himself, but focused in on surveillance abuses. Here we now face the same allegations, yet in manner that goes to the heart of our democracy. It is right out of a novel, with salacious, unverified dossiers, reports of informants that appear more like spies for the U.S. government, and application of the aforementioned surveillance powers to collect on a U.S. person once associated with President Trump's political campaign. But it's not a novel, it's real life, and we are here today to understand a little bit more about why we now must review how our intelligence and law enforcement agencies engaged in activity that appears not only wrong, but potentially illegal. All of which brings me to this body's constitutional oversight, mandate, and responsibilities. Our responsibility to the American people is to conduct robust oversight of agencies within this committee's jurisdiction to ensure that taxpayer-funded agencies operate lawfully. Our oversight, though, is only as good as the information we are provided. This committee's oversight has been hampered by both the FBI and DOJ's lack of consistent and vigorous production of the documents we need to hold the agencies accountable. While this production has significantly improved recently, it has felt like pulling teeth much of the time to obtain and review relevant documents. Moreover, we just recently learned that some documents the Inspector General received to conduct his investigation of the 2016 election have been interpreted by the Department of Justice to fall outside the first subpoena I ever issued as chairman of this committee. Shockingly, emails and communications of DOJ officials have not been produced at all. Therefore, we have not received any emails between prosecutors working the Clinton case. Said differently, we are not receiving and have not received potentially enlightening communications between prosecutors themselves, between prosecutors and DOJ management, including former Attorney General Lynch, or even communications between DOJ officials and those with the Obama White House. This is unacceptable, particularly when we had, long before issuing the subpoena, requested all documents provided to the Inspector General other than certain ones pertaining to grand jury material. The Department of Justice and the FBI are not mentioned in the United States Constitution. The President and Congress are. Our constitutional oversight necessitates that institutions like the FBI and DOJ yield to Congress' constitutional mandate. This is non-negotiable because we must assure the American people that the agencies under our jurisdiction operate fairly, treating all equally under the law. This hearing emphasizes the importance of transparency in helping to regain both the perception and reality of impartiality of our law enforcement system. Damage to the FBI and DOJ's reputations is not something any of us desire. But now that both agencies have been on the front pages for so long, we must all work to ensure those stories are able to focus once again on the great men and women performing admirable and often heroic jobs to protect our country. We expect to hear today how the FBI and the DOJ will hold people accountable and prevent this from happening again. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from both Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Director Wray. I now recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The events that have led up to this hearing are totally unacceptable. On Monday of this week, you notified us of this hearing without the 7-day notice required by the rules. On Tuesday, you started our committee markup more than an hour late again without notice to the minority. Then you allowed Mr. Jordan to offer an amendment to a resolution of inquiry that was patently non-germane, and then you stood out of view of the cameras in the hallway just off the hearing room while the majority voted to overturn the ruling of their own chair that the amendment was not germane. On Wednesday, you dropped all committee business to interview Peter Strzok, who had already volunteered to come in for an interview before you threatened him with a subpoena. Today we meet so that the majority can criticize the Deputy Attorney General to his face, largely about his failure to produce documents that you know he cannot produce. We will take a break so that we can go to the floor and vote on a so-called resolution of insistence based on the Jordan Amendment from earlier this week, a measure that is without precedent without the force of law, and clearly a pretext for a move against Mr. Rosenstein that the majority has already planned. And what is the great emergency that justifies this last-minute hearing? Why has the majority abandoned the rules and traditions that govern civility in the House? The tired story of Hillary Clinton's emails, of course, plus a few conspiracy theories about this special counsel. When President Trump and his administration were actively separating families at the border, ripping children out of the arms of their parents and causing untold suffering to thousands of families, that did not merit an emergency hearing by this committee. And now that thousands of children are still separated from their parents, with no clear plan from this administration for reuniting these families, where is the emergency hearing on that issue? We know that Russia, after successfully interfering with our 2016 elections, is actively working to disrupt the upcoming elections as well. We are told this by all of our intelligence agencies. The former National Security Advisor testified that our intelligence agencies, despite this, have received no instructions from the White House to protect the integrity of our election system. Have we scheduled an emergency hearing on that matter? For that matter, have we conducted any oversight at all on election security, on the family separation crisis, on the administration's failure to protect Dreamers, on the Justice Department's radical decision not to defend the Affordable Care Act in court, on the Supreme Court's recent decisions to undermine voting rights and workers' rights, on the President's ongoing conflicts of interest and clear violations of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution, or on the myriad other pressing issues within our committee's jurisdiction? No. As with so many issues, this committee stays silent. But on Hillary Clinton's emails, sound the alarms. Despite an Inspector General's report that in more than 500 exhaustive pages demonstrates conclusively that the outcome of the Clinton investigation was not affected by any improper bias, political or otherwise, we are wasting precious committee time to chase Hillary Clinton yet again. The Republicans seem desperate to prove that there was some sort of pro-Clinton and anti-Trump conspiracy within the FBI, when in fact the overwhelming evidence shows exactly the opposite. Virtually every action criticized in the Inspector General's report, Director Comey's July announcement, his public comments on the Clinton investigation and refusal to confirm the existence of the Trump investigations, and his October decision to announce publicly the reopening of the Clinton email investigation, ultimately harmed the candidacy of Secretary Clinton and inured to the benefit of Donald Trump, and no one will deny that fact. But I guess we shouldn't let facts stand in the way of a good manufactured emergency. According to the Republican memo for today's hearing, today is also an opportunity for members to consider, quote, the Justice Department's compliance with the committee's March 22nd subpoena, close quote. A subpoena that was not issued in compliance with House rules and therefore cannot be enforced. Even if it were a properly issued subpoena, the fight over document production seems to have boiled down to certain documents that the Republicans know the Department of Justice cannot turn over. Much of it evidence relating to an ongoing criminal investigation, the scoping documents outlining specific lines of inquiry in an ongoing criminal investigation, and the identities of confidential human sources still working undercover in the field. And that, of course, is the whole point. As part of their coordinated and determined effort to undermine the special counsel's investigation, Republicans are requesting documents they know they cannot have. If they somehow find themselves in possession of sensitive documents that go to the core of the special counsel's investigation, and if past practice holds, those documents will end up in the possession of the subject of the investigation, namely President Trump, and shortly thereafter on Fox News. And if the majority is rightly denied, they will do their best to undermine the credibility of the Department of Justice, the credibility of the Deputy Attorney General, and by extension, the credibility of the special counsel. They will likely try to hold Mr. Rosenstein in contempt. Some have even threatened him with impeachment. They may argue that he must be removed from his oversight role over the special counsel's investigation. This is an investigation, I might remind my colleagues, that has already yielded 5 guilty pleas and that has led to the indictment of 20 people so far. The President and some of his closest advisors are under investigation for having participated in a criminal conspiracy with a foreign power against the United States. That is an emergency. The President practically confessed to Lester Holt on television that he obstructed the investigation into that conspiracy when he said that he fired former FBI Director Comey because of, quote, this Russia stuff with Trump and Russia, close quote. That is an emergency. But is that the subject of today's emergency hearing? No. Or of any emergency hearing? No, it is not. I know that this has been a hard week for the majority. I know that it must be tempting to change the subject and rally the base with cries of lock her up. But we do not have the luxury of hiding or voting present at this critical juncture for our democracy. We cannot hide from our responsibilities. We cannot hide from our obligation to conduct oversight of a corrupt administration. We cannot hide from our constitutional duty to protect our elections from foreign interference, or to stand up for the rules and for our domestic institutions and for the rule of law. And we cannot hide from our responsibility not to interfere with a proper investigation. I ask my colleagues to consider this question as we proceed. When the special counsel's work is complete, when the enormity of what he finds has been laid bare, how will the American people judge your actions today? I yield back the balance of my time.
The committee will stand in recess and return immediately after this vote series to hear the opening statements of the Deputy Attorney General and the Director.
Did you come here from the White House?
No White House this morning.
Well, I don't know if you had to be. I don't know. Because Ava called me this morning to work, and I was like, I don't know where. Maybe on the desk. I don't know. She didn't say. I didn't ask her. It's probably this protest.
I'm kind of supposed to do it, but maybe
I would rather stay here.
not looking forward to that one. What protest is this?
Freedom Plaza. It's like some die-in or something. March. Yeah. This is like, it's hot. It's hot.
Well, not on my hit list. So.
Yeah.
Mark. Living the dream. How about you?
The committee will reconvene. We'd ask the media to at least settle down. We welcome our distinguished witnesses. And as is the practice of this committee, if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Sorry to make you keep standing up, Director. I know you're... Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Rod Rosenstein is the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. Throughout his distinguished career in public service, he has served in several divisions of the Department of Justice, and notably as the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland from 2005 until 2017. Before being nominated by President Trump to be Deputy Attorney General. Director Wray is the 8th Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Wray began his Department of Justice career in 1997 as an Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. He then served as in the office of the Deputy Attorney General and was nominated by President George W. Bush to serve as Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. He worked in private practice before President Trump nominated him to lead the Bureau in August of 2017. Your entire written statement will be entered into the record, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and to help you stay within that time, there's a timing light at the table. When you have 1 minute left, it will turn to yellow, and then a minute later to red. So we hope you'll keep your time within that limit, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we'll start with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of the committee. I always welcome the opportunity to appear before this distinguished body, but today is not a happy occasion. Based on my 30 years of experience in federal law enforcement, working with the outstanding men and women of law enforcement, federal, state, and local, in many of your districts, there's nobody who would be more committed to rooting out abuse and misconduct when there's credible evidence that it occurred. The Inspector General conducted a thorough investigation and found that some Federal Bureau of Investigation employees deviated from important principles in 2016 and 2017. Everyone knew about some of those departures when they occurred, such as discussing criminal investigations and encroaching on prosecutorial decisions. We learned about others through the internal investigation, such as leaking into the news media and exhibiting political bias. We need to correct errors, hold wrongdoers accountable, and deter future violations. Director Wray will describe what the FBI is doing to accomplish those goals. At the Department of Justice, our mandatory annual training will include lessons from the Inspector General's report, and we are considering other recommendations. We already revised the department's confidentiality policies to emphasize that non-public, sensitive information obtained in connection with our work is protected from disclosure. We intend to enforce that principle on our employees, and we need to demonstrate respect for it ourselves by protecting sensitive information entrusted to the FBI. Congressional oversight is vital to democracy. My June 27th letter, which I will submit for your consideration, explains how the executive branch handles congressional oversight requests for law enforcement and intelligence information. The FBI is managing an extraordinary volume of congressional oversight requests, some of which seek details about criminal investigations and intelligence sources. As a result of President Trump's commitment to transparency, the FBI is making unprecedented disclosures to the Congress, including granting access to hundreds of thousands of pages of investigative information and thousands of pages of classified documents. As with most things in Washington, the real work is not done on television, and it's not all done by me. Trump administration officials are meeting and talking with your staff every day. They're working overtime with teams of FBI employees to accommodate requests and produce relevant information to this committee, other House committees, and several Senate committees. This committee requested the production of all documents relevant to the Inspector General's review. As you well know, the FBI normally declines such requests. Because of the circumstances of this case and concerns that we developed during the investigation, the department agreed to produce all relevant FBI documents. I understand that the universe of potentially relevant documents was in the range of 1.2 million, although only a fraction are actually relevant. We began the production even before the Inspector General finished his report, after we confirmed that the investigation was substantially complete and production at that time would not interfere with it. As you know, the FBI struggled for some time with the scope and volume of the production. Some of your colleagues brought to my attention that the FBI's redaction policies created the appearance that relevant information was being concealed. I looked into the issue and I understood their concern. As a result, I called on U.S. Attorney John Lausch from Chicago to take charge of the project. Mr. Lausch is here with me today, and I know he's talked with some of you in recent days. He's been working on this project for some time. Mr. Lausch brings experience in handling large document productions in the private sector. He worked with committee members and staff and arranged a production process that seems to be working very well. I understand that some people still state concerns about the speed of the production, but those concerns are mistaken. Most requests have been fulfilled, and other document productions are in progress for this committee and other committees. I've devoted almost 30 years to the service of my country. In my line of work, we keep an open mind, and we complete our investigations before we allege wrongdoing by anybody. Our allegations are made under oath and supported by credible evidence. We treat everyone with respect and deal with one another in good faith. You and I are the beneficiaries and the temporary trustees of a remarkable experiment in self-government. Like each member of Congress, the Deputy Attorney General, the FBI Director, and other department officials represent the people of the United States. President Trump appointed us, the Senate confirmed our nominations, and we swore an oath when we accepted responsibility for helping to run the Department of Justice. That oath requires us to make controversial decisions. So here's the advice that I give to Department of Justice employees. Faithfully pursue the department's law enforcement mission and the administration's goals in a manner consistent with laws, regulations, policies, and principles. Be prepared to face criticism. That's part of the job. But ignore the tyranny of the news cycle, stick to the rule of law, and make honest decisions that will always withstand fair and objective review. Our department's 115,000 employees work diligently every day to keep America safe. Most of their good work is never the subject of any congressional hearing. It is a tremendous privilege to work in an organization that seeks the truth and serves the law. But the Department of Justice is not perfect. We will keep working to make it better, and we welcome your constructive assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Attorney General. Director Wray, welcome. And
Thank you.
I want to thank you both for getting here. I know you've come a long way to get here and under difficult circumstances with an injury.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the FBI's response to the Inspector General's report on DOJ and FBI activities in the run-up to the 2016 election. We take that report very seriously, and we accept its findings and its recommendations. We are already doing a whole number of things to address those recommendations, and we are determined to emerge from this experience better and wiser. The FBI is entrusted with a lot of authority, and our actions are appropriately, therefore, subject to close oversight. That oversight can make the FBI stronger and the public safer. Part of that oversight includes fulsome responses to legitimate oversight requests for documents and information. For months, we've been working with your committees to make witnesses available, answer questions, and produce or make available to you and your staff over now 880,000 pages. Although we have now substantially complied with a majority of the committee's subpoena, we are determined to get through the outstanding items, and we have increased staffing on this project even further. In just the past week, for example, we've had approximately 100 employees working day and night dedicated to this project through the weekend to collect, review, process, and produce thousands of additional pages. Turning to the IG's report, although the IG report did not find any evidence of political bias or improper consideration actually impacting the investigation under review, that report did identify errors of judgment, violations of or disregard for policy, and decisions that certainly, in the benefit of hindsight, were not the best choices. So I'd like to briefly summarize the steps we're taking to address the report's recommendations. First, we're going to be holding employees accountable for misconduct. We have already referred conduct highlighted in the report to the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is the FBI's independent disciplinary arm. And once the necessary process is complete, we will not hesitate to hold people strictly accountable. Second, we're making sure that every employee understands the lessons of the IG's report through in-depth training, starting at the top, starting with the executives, so we don't repeat mistakes identified in that report. Third, we're making sure that we have the policies, the procedures, and the training needed for everyone to understand and remember what is expected of all of us. That includes drilling home the importance of objectivity and of avoiding even the appearance of personal conflicts or political bias, ensuring that recusals are handled correctly, making all employees aware of our new media policy, which I issued last November, and making clear that we will not tolerate noncompliance with that policy, ensuring that we follow DOJ policies about public statements on ongoing investigations and uncharged conduct, and ensuring that we adhere strictly to all policies and procedures on the use of FBI systems, networks, and devices. I've also directed our new Associate Deputy Director, the number 3 official in the FBI, to lead a review of how we staff, structure, and supervise sensitive investigations so that we can make sure that each one is conducted to our highest standards. The IG report makes clear that we've got important work to do, but I do want to emphasize that this report is focused on a specific set of events in 2016 and a small number of employees connected with those events. Nothing in this report impugns the integrity of our workforce as a whole or the FBI as an institution. I want to be very clear with this committee about the FBI that I've gotten to see up close and personal in the 10 months since I've taken on this job. As I meet with our offices all over the world, offices represented by every one of the members up here on the dais, I encounter really remarkable, inspiring stories about the work our 37,000 men and women are doing every single day. We've rescued more than 1,300 kids from child predators this year alone. We've arrested more than 4,600 violent gang members in just the past few months. We've disrupted recently terrorist plots ranging from places like Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco to a crowded shopping mall in Miami, and I could go on and on. Our men and women are doing all of that great work and much, much more with the unfailing fidelity to our Constitution and the laws that it demands, the bravery that it deserves, and the integrity that the American people rightly expect. That means we're going to do this job by the book. I am committed to doing that. I would not be here if I wasn't committed to making sure we do it that way, and I expect all our employees to do the same. That means following our rules, following our policies, following our longstanding norms. There will be times when we feel extraordinary pressure not to follow our process and policies, but in my view, those are precisely the times that we need to adhere to them the most. We've got to stay faithful to our best traditions and our core values, making sure that we're not only doing the right thing, but doing it in the right way, and pursuing the facts independently and objectively, no matter who likes it. That, in my view, is the only way we can maintain the trust and credibility of the people we serve. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to address the Inspector General's report, and I look forward to answering the committee's questions.
Thank you, Director Wray. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I'll begin by recognizing the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to the witnesses. Mr. Rosenstein, August 8th, 2016, text message in the IG report from Lisa Page to Peter Strzok. Trump's not ever going to become president, right? Right? Peter Strzok responds, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Now, the Justice Department had previously provided text messages from that date. They included all the messages we now have except the "we'll stop it" text message. Why didn't the Justice Department produce that to Congress when we asked?
Mr. DeSantis, I spoke with our Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, yesterday, and he told me that when he testified, he didn't have a full opportunity to explain, and the technological details are pretty complicated, but he assured me he had had a long telephone conversation with Mr. Jordan after the hearing and explained it. He's much better positioned than I. What I can assure you...
So let me just ask this then.
If I could just explain, sir, I want to assure you and the American people, we're not withholding anything embarrassing. The message was not in the original material that the Inspector General, he found these messages.
Right, so you guys didn't find it, and he did. And so we're asking you to produce stuff, and obviously, you know, we're expecting a good faith effort. You guys didn't find it, and maybe somebody else deleted it or something happened before you guys, but he was able to find it and you didn't. So it was very disappointing to see that text message there, because I think you would agree. Just think of the timeline here. You have Peter Strzok. He opens up the counterintelligence investigation against Trump's campaign at the end of July. Then a week later, this text message, he ain't going to be president, we'll stop it. Then the next week, the infamous insurance policy text message where he says, we can't take the risk of a Trump presidency, you need an insurance policy. The American people see that. Doesn't that undermine the whole integrity of the actions of people like Peter Strzok?
Yes, Congressman, that obviously is highly inappropriate. And,
well, it's more than that, though.
By it as you are.
It's more than that. I mean, the Inspector General did find that the bias affected. He didn't say it affected the decision about Hillary, but he said once we got into the fall, when you had the Huma Abedin emails, and there was slow walking on that by Peter Strzok, he was really concerned with pursuing this collusion investigation. And he testified on the record that it was absolutely reasonable to say that the bias not only existed, but affected what he did. Let me ask you this. What did the DOJ or FBI do in terms of collecting information, spying, or surveillance on the Trump campaign, be it via Stefan Halper or anybody else working on behalf of the agencies?
As you know, Congressman, I'm not permitted to discuss any classified information in an open setting, but I can assure you that we are working with oversight committees and we're producing all relevant evidence that will allow them to answer those questions.
Let me ask you this then. Did the Obama administration, anybody in the administration, direct anybody, Halper or anybody else, to make contact with anyone associated with the Trump campaign?
As I said, Congressman, I appreciate, obviously, I understand your interest, but I'm not permitted to discuss classified information.
Well, we want the documents, so I know we're in a back and forth on that, but the American people need to know were the counterintelligence powers of the Obama administration unleashed against Trump's campaign. If that was done, was it done inappropriate? Let me ask you this. You know, they talk about the Mueller investigation. It's really the Rosenstein investigation. You appointed Mueller. You're supervising Mueller. And it's supposedly about collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia and obstruction of justice. But you wrote the memo saying that Comey should be fired. And you signed the FISA extension for Carter Page. So my question is to you, seems like you should be recused from this more so than Jeff Sessions, just because you were involved in making decisions affecting both prongs of this investigation. Why haven't you done that?
Congressman, I can assure you that if it were appropriate for me to recuse, I'd be more than happy to do so and let somebody else handle this, but it's my responsibility to do it. And all I can tell you, sir,
then how do you have obstruction of justice possibility for a president exercising his powers to fire an FBI director that you said should be fired? And oh, by the way, the IG report makes it clear Jim Comey should have been fired. So why are we still doing this with the Mueller probe?
Sir, I am not commenting on what is under investigation by the Mueller probe, and to the best of my knowledge, neither is Mr. Mueller. I know there's a lot of speculation in the media about that, but that doesn't relieve me of my obligation not to discuss the subject matter of the investigation.
Do you accept what IG Horowitz said regarding Peter Strzok and the fall campaign with Huma Abedin emails, how he slow-walked that versus how he was so gung-ho about the Trump-Russia collusion? Remember, he texted Lisa Page. The other thing, Hillary mattered because we didn't want to mess it up, but this matters because it matters. That's what he wanted to do, and that's where he was focusing his energy on. Horowitz said his bias is an appropriate explanation for his conduct. Do you agree?
I certainly agree with the findings of the Inspector General report, and I think those messages clearly do indicate bias.
Well, you guys have some work to do, because if the bias is affecting official action, that is a big, big problem. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Director Wray, this may be an appropriate time to make what is kind of an easy request, but could you state for the record what is the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Investigation's policy on commenting on any matter related to an ongoing criminal or counterintelligence investigation? And does this policy apply to document production even when requested by Congress?
Yes, Congresswoman. Director Wray may be able to speak more specifically to the reasons why the FBI doesn't comment on counterintelligence investigations, but we do not discuss counterintelligence investigations or criminal investigations while they're ongoing.
Congresswoman, it's always been my experience that the Department and the FBI do not comment on ongoing investigations. There are a number of reasons for that that go back to all the days when I was a line prosecutor, and long, long before that. They have to do with protecting the reputations and the privacy of the people who are subject to the investigation. They have to do with protecting the integrity of the ongoing investigation. They have to do with protecting the rights to fair trial when that's relevant, and there are a whole number of reasons. And when you add the counterintelligence dimension, there's the need to protect sources and methods. And one of the central learnings of the Inspector General's report, frankly, that we're here talking about with this committee is about what goes wrong when you do talk about ongoing investigations.
So these policies apply to all current and former personnel at DOJ and the FBI, as well as to the special counsel investigation, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. You know, it seems to me, I mentioned this the other day, that we are here pursuing release of information that, in my experience on this committee, 24 years on this committee and 9 years as a member of this staff of one of the members of the committee, that I've never seen this happen before. And having been given the opportunity, along with just Mr. Nadler, Mr. Goodlatte, and Mr. Gowdy, to actually read the entire application on the Carter page, the FISA application, along with the accompanying documents, took me all day. I mean, I canceled all my appointments. It's very obvious why that material should not be in the public arena. There are people, I think, who would certainly could lose their lives if their identities were made known. And it's an example of the requirement that you labor under, but also that the committee labors under. I want to mention, and Mr. Jordan is here, so he'll correct me if my understanding is incorrect, but I understand Mr. Jordan accused you, Mr. Rosenstein, on the floor during debate of threatening the HPSI staff if they attempt to hold you in contempt for failing to comply with document requests. And I think it's important we put this on the record. Have you, Mr. Rosenstein, ever threatened congressional staff, including but not limited to House Intelligence Committee staff, as it relates to requests for you to produce documents or any other matter for that?
Congresswoman, people make all kinds of allegations. And in my business, we ask, who's the witness and how credible are they? And if somebody comes forward and swears under oath that I threaten them, then I'll be happy to respond. All I can tell you with regard to that matter is that in the room at the time were 3 officials appointed by President Trump, confirmed by the United States Senate, Director Wray, Assistant Attorney General Boyd, and me. 2 former Republican U.S. attorneys were also in the room with us, Greg Brower, who at the time was serving as the legislative liaison for the FBI, and Scott Schools.
So your answer is no?
The answer is no, I have not threatened anyone.
Thank you very much. I just like to close with this as my time is running out. It just seems to me that we are asking you to violate the policies that you labor under, and we've been doing that repeatedly. We've got the 500-page IG report. You've acknowledged the needs to improve areas. Last week we held a 6-hour hearing. Yesterday, 11 hours trying to get the FBI to violate the same policies that you are upholding today. And I think it's really not what this committee should be doing. I do not believe it is in the best interest of this country, and certainly it does not uphold and elevate the rule of law, which is what this committee should be doing and has been doing for the quarter century that I've served on it. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, I am in violent agreement with the statements you made after this report was published, that nothing in the report impugns the patriotic work of the FBI employees who are serving in my district and around the world. And this mess in Washington has nothing to do with them, and I want to make that very clear. And I appreciate your statements on that subject. Deputy Director, the Democratic memo that the President declassified says the Department of Justice accurately informed the court that the FBI initiated its counterintelligence investigation on July 31st, 2016. Did any investigative activity regarding the Trump campaign in Russia occur before July 31st, 2016?
Congressman, as you know, we're dealing with the Intelligence Committee on that issue, and Chairman Nunes met with Director Wray and me. I received the same briefing that he received. So I don't know any additional information beyond what he knows about that, and I'm not able to produce any information beyond what the FBI has told me. So,
Are you aware, as you sit here today, of any payments that were made to any person to collect intelligence on the Trump campaign prior to July 31st, 2016?
No, but keep in mind I wasn't there. I only know what information that we've obtained from the FBI records.
Are you, as you sit here today, aware of any efforts to contact Roger Stone that occurred prior to July 31st, 2016?
I don't have any personal knowledge, Congressman, but I know that we are seeking to respond to Chairman Nunes' request. I think one thing you need to understand...
Same question as it regards to Michael Caputo.
I wasn't there, and so I can only answer questions that we direct to the FBI and then have them...
You're there now, right? I mean, have you asked these questions of anyone?
We have absolutely conveyed all the questions that Chairman Nunes has raised, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to respond to him fairly soon.
You could understand why it would be of tremendous importance to the country that if the Department of Justice has represented to a court that this investigation began on July 31st, and if the fact that you cannot tell me definitively that before July 31st there was not intelligence collected on the Trump campaign, that is something of great interest to us.
Congressman, I think you should understand that there is nobody more committed to rooting out abuse and misconduct than I. We talk with the FBI, we take those allegations seriously, and we look to find any credible evidence. And if we find it, we're going to produce it to Chairman Nunes.
Thank you. Let's do that quickly. And let's get into your determination to find out that activity which is occurring in your department. At the last hearing we had, I asked you when you first became aware that Nellie Orr, the wife of your Associate Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr, was working for Fusion GPS and was actively assigned to the dossier that said all these nasty things about President Trump. As you sit here today, do you know when you became first aware of that?
I believe it would have been sometime in the fall of 2017. As I think I told you last time, Mr. Orr was never working, to my knowledge, on that Russia investigation.
Well, his wife was, right? I mean, like, right. He's your assistant or your associate deputy attorney general, and his wife gets hired for that. I asked you this question on the 13th of December. I wrote you a letter on the 18th of December, 9 months ago. You have not responded to it. We need a date when you found out that the wife of your deputy was working for people who are actively trying to undermine President Trump. Don't you think that's a really important date for you to know about the spouse of your own Associate Deputy Attorney General?
Yes, I think it's important for you to understand, Congressman, Mr. Orr is a career employee of the department. He was there when I arrived. To my knowledge, he wasn't working on the Russia matter.
I don't care if he's there 100
Well, I think it's important for you to know, sir, that when we learned the relevant information, we arranged to transfer Mr. Orr to a different office.
Let's get to
in addition to that,
hold on, I'm sorry, I got to reclaim my time, Mr. Rosenstein. The FISA renewal that you signed, list for me the people who briefed you on the substance of that FISA renewal to go and spy on people.
So, Mr. Gates, here's one thing I think is important for you to understand. People can make all kinds of allegations publicly. I am quite confident about my conduct throughout this investigation. That matter is under review by the Inspector General. We'll see what the Inspector General finds.
Did you read the FISA application before you signed it?
I'm not going to comment about any FISA application.
So you won't say to this committee whether or not you even read the document you signed that authorized spying on people associated with the Trump campaign?
Well, I I dispute your characterization of what that FISA is about, sir.
Did you read it or did you not read
I'll be
it?
happy to review, I'll be happy to discuss the details with you. But as I told you, sir.
Did Peter Strzok brief you on it?
No,
Did Lisa Page brief you on it?
no.
Did Sally Moyer brief you on it?
Now, let me explain the process, if I may.
Well, did Tricia Anderson brief you on it?
No FBI personnel briefed me on it. The process, sir, is that these FISA applications and renewals first come up through the FBI chain of command. They are sworn under oath by a career federal agent. I'm not the affiant.
But you signed it.
Well, I'll explain the process to you.
Did you thoroughly review it, yes or
I
no?
want to explain the process to you.
The
I'm
time-
out of time. Did you thoroughly review
The
it?
time of the gentleman has expired.
I'd
The
like to
witness will
explain
be
the process.
permitted to answer the question.
I'd like to explain the process. Director Wray can explain it too, sir. My responsibility at that time was to approve the filing of FISA applications because only 3 people in the department are authorized to be the final sign-off, the Attorney General, the Deputy, and the Assistant Attorney General for National Security, who at the time that position was vacant. So it's my responsibility to do that. I have fortunately been relieved of that responsibility. Director Wray still does it every day. And I don't know exactly what his process is, sir, but we sit down with a team of attorneys from the Department of Justice, all of whom review that, provide a briefing for us about what's in it. And, sir, I've reviewed that one in some detail. And I can tell you, sir, that the information that's public about that doesn't match with my understanding of the one that I signed. But I think it's appropriate to let the Inspector General complete that investigation. These are serious allegations. I don't do the investigation. I'm not the affiant. I'm reviewing the finished product, sir.
Are they investigating
If the
you?
Inspector General finds that I did something wrong, then I'll respect that judgment. But I think it's highly, highly unlikely, sir, given the way the process works.
Yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and let me thank the ranking member who remains on the floor. I know he's en route. I'm almost believing that I've just attended or I'm in the midst of a monster ball, and we're looking for monsters wherever we can find them. As I was on the floor, I heard someone say, Mr. Deputy Attorney General, that they're interested in holding you in contempt. Maybe they may be mollified by a resolution that really has no real point to it, but this is the absurdity that we are dealing with in an investigation that has proceeded and I believe has concluded. So let me ask you, 2 investigations that were ongoing in 2016, could you just very briefly say what they were? 2 investigations regarding presidential candidates. What were those investigations?
Congressman,
Mrs. Clinton, what was the investigation for Mrs.
I'm not going to comment on any investigation that may have been ongoing. I know there's a lot of publicity about it, but I'm not going to comment on it.
All right, can you comment on the IG report? What was the IG report about?
Yes, the IG report is about, actually it's about a variety of misconduct that occurred in the FBI in 2016 and 2017.
Relating to?
Relating to, well, it's primarily focused on the Hillary Clinton email investigation, but the Inspector General actually addressed a few other issues in that report as well.
Did that investigation come to a conclusion in 2016, to your knowledge?
The Hillary Clinton email investigation?
Yes.
Well, it did, based upon public reports.
And based upon public reports, was the Department of Justice satisfied with those, the end of that investigation?
Congresswoman, I have the same response I had to Mr. Gates. I wasn't there, and I'm not the one to comment on whether or not people were satisfied with the result. We all know what the result was.
Director Wray, your agents were involved in the FBI investigation of the Clinton emails. Is that accurate?
Yes, obviously I was not there at the time, but yeah, absolutely.
You've had a chance to review the Inspector General's report
I have.
and saw the fractions that were cited to the FBI.
I'm sorry, the
Fractions, the infractions support.
Oh, the infractions,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Have you corrected, or do you have a comment on any of the infractions which you corrected, i.e. Director speaking about an investigation without the presence or yielding to one of the prosecutors of the DOJ, such as what Director Comey did?
Well, Congresswoman, I'm not going to add my own personal opinion on top of the Inspector General's very thorough report, but we, as I said earlier, we do accept the findings that are in the report and the recommendations in it, and I will say that...
What have you done with respect to the recommendation about the idea of a director of the FBI making such statements? going forward?
So we've done a couple of things. One is that we have issued a new media policy that is much more clear so that we ensure that people follow our policies. We've also directed people to make sure that they're adhering to DOJ policies about commenting on ongoing investigations and specifically about uncharged conduct.
From the law enforcement perspective, which is what your arm is.
Correct.
Is that correct?
We're not the prosecutors.
Thank you. Do you have any comment on the suggestion that one of your officers delayed in investigating the Wiener laptop? Do you think that was done to undermine the investigation?
Well, Congresswoman, again, I think rather than substitute my characterization for the Inspector General's, which is very detailed, I would just say that my read of the Inspector General's report is that he found that there were delays as a result of a number of factors, and we are taking steps to make sure that going forward, as I said in my opening comments, that we structure, staff, and supervise sensitive investigations in an appropriate way so that we don't repeat any of the mistakes that are reflected.
And looking back, do you think that impeded or impacted on the final conclusion of the Clinton email investigation?
Well, again, I would defer to the Inspector General's own characterization of his investigation. My understanding of it is that he found that there was no political bias ultimately impacting the investigation that he reviewed.
Mr. Attorney General, do you believe, as Donald Trump indicated, that the investigation of which you have read, the Inspector General's report, has vindicated Mr. Trump as relates to collusion with Russian agents, as he indicated? Or is the investigation ongoing?
There is an ongoing investigation, yes.
And it's not concluded?
Correct.
And no conclusion has been made on any aspect of the investigation today?
Well, there have been several charges that have been filed, and so you're familiar with those.
Correct.
The gentlewoman
It's
has.
ongoing. Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Russia investigation has been going on for almost 2 years now. Special counsel's investigation has been going on for over a year now. For most Americans, it's important to know what Russia did to our country in 2016 and with whom, if anyone, they did it. When a foreign state interferes with our democratic electoral process, it should be a chance of a lifetime for a law enforcement agent to investigate that, except apparently the one that was actually picked to investigate it. That was Peter Strzok. FBI agent Peter Strzok was picked to lead the FBI's investigation into what Russia did in July of 2016. It was a counterintelligence investigation begun in late July 2016, and he was leading it, and at about the exact same time he was picked to lead it, this dispassionate and fair FBI agent was calling Trump a disaster, destabilizing for the country. I'll leave out all the adjectives he used to describe that. I'll just go with disaster and destabilizing. Same time, his FBI lawyer girlfriend, Lisa Page, was telling him he was meant to protect the country. This neutral, dispassionate FBI agent said, I can protect the country at many levels. Same time, Peter Strzok, who was picked to objectively, fairly, neutrally look into the Russia investigation, was talking about an insurance policy with Andy McCabe and Lisa Page in the event Donald Trump became the president. All of this was happening at the same time Peter Strzok said he could smell the Trump support in Southern Virginia. All this was at the same time that this FBI agent said a Trump presidency would be effing terrifying and that it will never happen. No, we'll stop it. So while investigating Russia and their attempt to subvert our democracy may have been important to the rest of the country, it wasn't all that important to about a half dozen FBI agents and lawyers who were assigned to the case. For them, it was an investigation to stop Donald Trump, which then brings us to May of 2017 and the appointment of special counsel, where we find Peter Strzok again, this same supposed to be dispassionate, neutral, fair FBI agent. You would think he'd be really excited about investigating what a foreign power tried to do to this country, but you would be wrong again for Peter Strzok at precisely the same time that Bob Mueller was appointed, precisely the same time. Peter Strzok was talking about his unfinished business and how he needed to fix and finish it so Donald Trump did not become president. He was talking about impeachment within 3 days of special counsel Mueller being appointed. 3 days. That's even quicker than MSNBC and the Democrats were talking about impeaching him. Within 3 days, the lead FBI agent is talking about impeaching the president. So this is where we are. We're 2 years into this investigation. We're a year and a half into the presidency. We're over a year into special counsel. You have a counterintelligence investigation that's become public. You have a criminal investigation that's become political. You have more bias than I have ever seen manifest in a law enforcement officer in the 20 years I used to do it for a living. And 4 other DOJ employees who had manifest animus towards the person they were supposed to be neutrally and detachedly investigating. Democrats are using this investigation as a presumption of guilt, which I find astonishing, and in the long run for the health of this republic, I would encourage them to go back to the presumption of innocence that we used to hold sacred. There's a presumption of guilt. There's a desire by Democrat senators to fundraise off of your investigation. More than 60 Democrats have already voted to proceed with impeachment before Bob Mueller has found a single solitary damn thing. More than 60 have voted to move forward with impeachment, and he hasn't presented his first finding. So I'm going to say this to you, Mr. Wray, Mr. Rosenstein. I realize that neither one of you were there when this happened, but you're both there now. Russia attacked this country. They should be the target, but Russia isn't being hurt by this investigation right now. We are. This country is being hurt by it. We are being divided. We've seen the bias. We've seen the bias. We need to see the evidence. If you have evidence of wrongdoing by any member of the Trump campaign, present it to the damn grand jury. If you have evidence that this president acted inappropriately, present it to the American people. There's an old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. I think right now all of us are being denied. Whatever you got, finish it the hell up, because this country is being torn apart. I would yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Either of the witnesses care to respond to the...
I would simply respond, Ms. Gowdy. I certainly share your views about those text messages, and nobody is more offended than I about what's reflected in those messages. With regard to the investigation, I've heard the suggestions that we should just close the investigation. I think the best thing we can do is finish it appropriately and reach a conclusion. And I certainly agree with you, sir, that people should not jump to conclusions without seeing the evidence. I've been the victim of fake news attacks myself, so I'm sympathetic. I agree with you, sir, that there's been no allegation made by the Department of Justice or the special counsel other than what's reflected in those documents that are filed publicly, the charged folks. And nobody should draw any conclusions beyond those charges.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Director Wray, Mr. Rosenstein, was Peter Strzok the head of any of those investigations?
Well, Congressman, I don't know that I would characterize him as the head of any of the investigations. Certainly, he played a significant role in the investigations that are described in the Inspector General's report, but there was a supervisory chain, and as the Inspector General found, there were a number of people involved in that chain above him.
And I know you've spoken already about the Investigator General's report. It's very thorough, and you accepted it. It came to the conclusion that while he may have had biases, none of his biases played a role in their actions or their conclusions. Is that correct?
Well, again, I would defer to the Inspector General's own characterization of his very thorough investigation, but my understanding of it is that he found no evidence of political bias actually impacting the investigation that he reviewed.
So all we had was some talk between friends, maybe lovers, and it was just talk, but no policy and no action to bring about or effectuate any of their beliefs, correct?
Well, again, I don't know that I want to start characterizing their text messages. I expect all our folks to conduct themselves professionally at all times, and the other reason I want to be careful about straying too far is that, as I said in my opening, we have referred a number of individuals whose conduct is highlighted in the report to our Office of Professional Responsibility, and my commitment to doing things by the book includes making sure that our disciplinary process is done by the book, and having the director comment on their conduct in this setting is probably not conducive to that.
Thank you, sir. Am I correct that each of you were appointed by President Trump? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And who appointed the special counsel?
I did.
And you were appointed by President Trump?
Correct.
Now, President Trump talks about 13 Democrats running this investigation. Do you know who he's speaking about, and if there's any way that the Justice Department or President Trump knows if these people are Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Bolsheviks?
You'd have to ask him, sir. I do not know.
You don't know if they're Democrats?
I do not know their political registration, no, sir.
Director Wray, do you know any of these people's political registrations?
I'm not familiar with their political registration, no.
Thank you. This report, the special counsel has gone on for a long time. Could that be because there is so much information and so many issues that have arisen from his investigation that it's impossible to just turn it off? Is that possible, Mr. Rosenstein?
Sir, I do not think you should draw any inference. I don't think, as these sort of investigations go, that it's actually been going on for a long time, and I can assure you that Director Mueller understands that I want him to conclude it as expeditiously as possible, consistent with his responsibility to do it right.
Has anybody ever accused Director Mueller, Special Counsel Mueller, excuse me, of being dilatory, lazy, slow?
I certainly haven't, sir. I don't know what other allegations people make, but I certainly do not view that as accurate.
Director Wray, do you know Special Counsel Mueller's reputation for promptly doing his work and proceeding in a diligent path?
My own experience and familiarity with Director Mueller is that none of those adjectives would describe to much of anything he's done in his career for this country.
Director Mueller, as I remembered, volunteered to join the Marines in Vietnam, got a Purple Heart and had other commendations. Is that what you understand too?
Yes, sir.
And then when he came back, he went to law school, and he went to work for justice. He could have gone to Wall Street and made a lot of money. In fact, he went into private practice for a while, but he didn't like it, and he came back because he wanted to prosecute criminals. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know his motivation, but I do know he's devoted much of his career to public service and has foregone more lucrative opportunities.
And he prosecuted Manuel Noriega, did he not?
Congressman, I'm not certain whether he was, I think he was in a management position. I don't know if he personally prosecuted it, but I think that's correct.
And John Gotti?
I don't know the answer to that, sir.
Well, he's gone after big fish. Let me ask each of you to promise me something. Will you promise me and the American people that no matter what pressure is brought about and brought on you by whomever, that you will stay in your position and finish the job and do what you were appointed to do and what the American people need you to do?
Congressman, in the Department of Justice, we're accustomed to criticism, and it does not affect our work.
Congressman, as I've said repeatedly, I am committed to doing this job by the book in all respects, and there's no amount of political pressure that's going to dissuade me from that by either side.
Thank you. And I find you and each of you and Special Counsel Mueller as paragons and people who should be revered and not torn down, and people who tear them down,
Time of the gentleman.
tear down the flag and tear down the
Time
American
of the gentleman
government.
has
I yield
expired.
back and hope the Constitution is respected.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for
Thank you,
5
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosenstein, why are you keeping information from Congress?
Congressman, I am not keeping any information from Congress that it's
In
appropriate
a few
for us to
minutes, Mr.
disclose.
Rosenstein, I think the House of Representatives is going to say something different.
I don't agree with you, Congressman. I don't believe that's what they're going to say, and if they do, they'll
I
be mistaken.
disagree, but I
They will
think,
be mistaken.
in a few minutes, the House of Representatives is going to go on record saying you haven't complied with requests from a separate and equal branch of government, that you haven't complied with subpoenas, and you got 7 days to get your act together. I think that's what's going to happen in a few, and that's not Jim Jordan. I think that's a majority of the House of Representatives. In just a few minutes, I think that's going to happen. And I want to know why you won't give us what we've asked for.
Sir, I certainly hope that your colleagues are not under that impression. That is not accurate, sir. And
It is accurate. We have caught you hiding
Mr.
information,
Chairman, can we allow the witness to
Rosenstein.
answer? Mr. Chairman, point of order. We can go to Mr. Jordan's press conference and listen to him, but we came here to hear from the witnesses.
The time belongs to the gentleman.
Mr. Rosenstein,
Can we allow him to answer?
we have caught
will
you
be
hiding
permitted to
information
Can
from
we allow him to
Congress.
answer?
He will be permitted to
I answer that,
answer
Mr.
when
Jordan?
Mr. Jordan.
Why do we have them here
We'll allow
if
him
they're not
additional
allowed
to
time
answer?
to answer. The
Why are they
gentleman
not
is-
allowed to answer?
The gentleman's out of order. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Rose, let me make this one point, then I'll let
Yes,
you
Mr.
answer.
Jordan, I'd like to
Let
answer
me make
your
this one point
accusation, sir.
where we've
Can I
caught you
answer your
hiding
accusation,
information, then
sir?
you can answer. Why did you hide the fact that Peter Strzok and Judge Contreras were friends? Why did you redact that in the documents you gave to us? Judge Contreras is kind of important. FISA court judge, more importantly, just as importantly, the judge that heard Mike Flynn's case. Why'd you try to hide that from us?
Mr. Jordan, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to respond. I've heard you make those sort of allegations publicly on TV.
I got
And if
I
you
got it
let
right
me
here.
respond, sir.
Mr. Chairman, he should be given
Right
the
here.
opportunity
Now, Mr.
to
Jordan,
answer.
It's redacted.
I am the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. Okay? I'm not the person doing the redacting. I'm responsible for responding to your concerns as I have. I have a team with me, sir. It's just a fraction of the team that's doing this work, and whenever you brought issues to my attention, I have taken appropriate steps to remedy them. So your statement that I'm personally keeping information from you, trying to conceal information
You're
from
the
the
boss,
American
Mr.
people, is not
Rosenstein.
true. That's correct. And my job is to make sure that we respond to your concerns. We have, sir. Now, I've appointed Mr. Lausch, who is managing that production, and my understanding is it's actually going very well, sir. So I appreciate your concerns.
Again, I think the House of Representatives is going to say otherwise.
But your use of this to attack me personally
Why did you?
is
It's not
deeply
a
wrong.
personal.
Point of order,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. May the witness be permitted to
not-
answer the
it's
question?
not personal.
The gentleman will suspend. The witness is going to have an opportunity to say whatever he wants at the end of Mr. Jordan's 5 minutes. Until the
It is
end
not
of those
personal.
5 minutes, they're his time.
I appreciate your service. It's not personal. We just want the information. Why did you tell Peter Strzok not to answer our questions yesterday? When I asked Peter Strzok if he'd ever communicated with Glenn Simpson, he gave us the answer he gave us dozens of times. On advice of FBI counsel, I can't answer that question. Why couldn't he answer that question?
Mr. Jordan, I appreciate your sincere concerns, but I didn't give Peter Strzok any instructions. If there was some problem with the instructions he had, I'll be happy to look into it.
Not what his
You have to
FBI lawyer
understand,
said.
Mr. Jordan, when you find some problem with a production or with questions, it doesn't mean that I'm personally trying to conceal something from you. It means we're running an organization that's trying to follow the rules, and we're going to
You
respond.
know what was
to your
interesting? When I
concerns.
asked him if he'd ever talked to Bruce Orr, he said he had. Said he had 3 times in 2016 and 2017. Then I asked him, have you ever talked to Nellie Orr? And he said, no, I haven't. I said, well, why can you answer that question? Because Nellie Orr worked for Glenn Simpson, worked for Fusion. He could answer that question, but he couldn't answer because FBI counsel told him he couldn't. He couldn't answer the question whether he'd ever communicated with Glenn Simpson, a journalist. Why couldn't he answer that question?
Mr. Jordan, I appreciate you saying it isn't personal. Sometimes it feels that way. How do I know, sir? I mean, you interviewed Mr. Strzok. I didn't, so I can't
Works
answer.
for you. Doesn't work for us.
There are 115,000 people who work for me, sir.
Mr. Rosenstein, did you threaten staffers on the House Intelligence Committee? Media reports indicate you did.
Media reports are mistaken.
Sometimes. But this is what they said. Having the nation's #1 law enforcement officer threaten to subpoena your calls and emails is downright chilling. Did you threaten to subpoena their calls and emails?
No, sir, and there's no way to subpoena phone calls.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying. I'm reading what the press said. I'm reading what
Well,
the
I
press
would
said.
suggest that you not rely on what the press says, sir.
Well, I didn't ask if there's no way to do it. I asked if you said it.
If I said what?
What I just read you.
No, I did not.
Well, now who are we supposed to believe? Staff members who we've worked with, who've never misled us, or you guys who we've caught hiding information from us, who tell a witness not to answer our questions? Who are we supposed to believe?
Thank you for making clear it's not personal, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I'm saying the
You should
Department of
believe me because
Justice.
I'm telling the truth and I'm under oath. And if you want to put somebody else under oath and they have something different
I
to
know
say,
these
I'll be
staff
happy to
members.
respond.
Here's my last question. What's so important that you know that you don't want us to know, that you won't give us the documents we're asking for, that the House of Representatives is about ready to go on record saying you should give us? What's so darn important that you will threaten members, at least according to media reports and according to the staff members, threaten
Parliamentary
members?
inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
What is so important, Mr. Rosenstein?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
This is not an appropriate time for a parliamentary inquiry.
And point of order. The gentleman keeps representing that the House of Representatives, yes, it will be, the Republicans who continue
It's
to
not,
not.
that
want
is
to let
not
this-
an appropriate point of order.
Well, he needs to be corrected in his statement.
The time of the gentleman
will
be
be the
restored.
members of the Republican Party that will
Gentleman will
vote in that
suspend. The time of the gentleman from Ohio will be restored for another additional 15 seconds, and then the Deputy Attorney General will be allowed to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Rosenstein, Mr. Wray, I do appreciate your work, but I'd also appreciate if the House of Representatives could get the information. We have repeatedly, Mr. Gowdy talked about how long this investigation is going on, how long there's been a special counsel. We started asking for information in July of last year, and some of that is still has not been given to the Congress, still not has been given to this committee, the committee charged with defending the Judiciary Committee. So I appreciate what you do. I just want the information, and we're so frustrated that there is now a resolution on the floor of the House in just a few minutes that will be voted on.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Rosenstein will be allowed to respond.
I don't have any control over what resolutions you vote on, sir, and
I
you
know
should
you
feel free to
don't.
do that. but
The gentleman will suspend it.
if
The
you're
time now is the
interested
Attorney
in-
General's.
If you're interested in the truth, Mr. Jordan, the truth is, we have a team of folks, they're Trump appointees and career folks, and they're doing their best to produce these documents. Director Wray explained to you the process. He's got hundreds of people working around the clock trying to satisfy these requests. So whether you vote or not is not going to affect it. You're going to get everything that's relevant that we can find and produce to you. I support this report, sir. I'm not trying to hide anything from you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Gentlemen, I appreciate your service. I've been impressed with your diligence and your honesty and your integrity in this very difficult environment that we find ourselves in. And basically, it's a situation where the majority is hurting this country. We're hurting our country with what we're doing today. What we're doing today is holding an emergency hearing, a so-called emergency hearing based on allegations that political influence or political bias within the FBI and the DOJ has somehow led to a illegitimate result in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. That's an investigation that was conducted originally. It was conducted by the FBI and DOJ, no criminal charges filed, investigation closed. Then there was a Inspector General's investigation of that investigation. Those reports, or that report was issued last week. It found that there was no wrongdoing in the investigation of the investigation. And now today we have an investigation of the investigation of the investigation, and it's a emergency situation. Also a part of this hearing is a attempt to investigate the ongoing criminal investigation into the allegations and indications of collusion and perhaps conspiracy with Russians in the conducting of the 2016 presidential election. And ominously, what the Republicans are trying to do is force the FBI and DOJ to turn over to this committee investigating the investigators information, documents that go to the heart of the criminal investigation. It's been my experience that the criminal investigators never turn over information. They're never even asked to turn over information in an ongoing criminal investigation. Can you both comment on the uniqueness of what's happening today and the danger that it poses to justice in this country?
Congressman, I don't believe it poses any danger because we are not going to produce any documents that will interfere with an ongoing investigation.
Well,
As I said, in response to Mr. Jordan's question, we actually are producing the documents. It's a large volume of documents. It's taking a lot of time. And as I said, I thought he had a legitimate point about the redactions that made it appear as if the Bureau was concealing information. So we brought in Mr. Lausch. We changed the process. And I actually think, in reality, it's working quite well. And whatever anybody votes on is beyond my control.
Well, go ahead.
Congressman, We are committed to being responsive to legitimate congressional oversight. We're trying our hardest to produce documents as quickly as we possibly can and as completely as we possibly can. We also have an obligation to protect ongoing criminal and counterintelligence investigations. We also have an obligation to respect grand jury secrecy. We also have an obligation to protect sources and methods. And we're sworn to do those things just like we are to protect and be responsive to congressional oversight. And the Inspector General's report, ironically, the report that we're here to talk about, is very pointed on the subject as one of the principal failings that it found was commenting on an ongoing investigation publicly and with Congress. And so we take those lessons very seriously. We're trying to learn those lessons.
Well, Director Wray, threatening you with a subpoena, threatening you with contempt of Congress for noncompliance with a congressional subpoena, puts you in a bad position, doesn't it?
Well, certainly when I was minding my own business in private practice in Atlanta, I didn't think I was going to be spending the first 10 months of my job staring down the barrel of a contempt citation for conduct that occurred long before I even thought about being FBI director. Having said that, I am committed to making sure that we're responsive to these committees. And to the extent that we can do better, we're trying to do better.
Well, there's certain information.
But at the same time, in my experience, there are two principles that have to be balanced. Responsiveness to congressional oversight, which is very important to me personally, but also respecting ongoing criminal investigations, which is also very important.
And there's certain information that you cannot provide to this committee based on the ongoing nature of the criminal investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The committee will stand in recess. There's 6 minutes and 45 seconds remaining in a vote on the floor, and we will reconvene as soon as that vote concludes.
Couldn't hear you. What? Oh, gotcha. Okay.